answer is no.
Mr. Graham.
And it is no substitute for testimony before this committee.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass. Mr. Flake. Mr. Crapo. Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Feinstein.
Aye.
Mr. Leahy.
Aye.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
Aye.
Ms. Klobuchar. Mr. Coons.
Aye.
Mr. Blumenthal.
Aye.
Ms. Hirono. Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Mr. Chairman.
No.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 10 yeas, 11 nays.
The motion is defeated. Now I move, as I said I was going to do, that we set the vote to report out Judge Kavanaugh's nomination at 1:30 p.m. today.
Mr. Chairman, point of order. Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Graham.
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
Mr. Cornyn.
That's violating the rules of the committee. Yes.
Yeah.
Mr. Lee. Mr. Cruz. Mr. Sass.
Well, this is.
Mr. Flake.
The
Mr.
ram
Crapo.
job continues.
Mr. Tillis. Mr. Kennedy. Mrs. Feinstein.
No.
Mr. Leahy.
No, because it violates the customs of this committee. It violates them.
No.
Mr. Durbin. Mr. Whitehouse.
No.
Ms. Klobuchar. No. Mr. Coons.
No.
Mr. Blumenthal.
No.
Ms. Hirono.
I strongly object. This is just totally ridiculous. What a railroad job. The answer is no, no, no.
Mr. Booker. Ms. Harris. Ms. Harris.
They're not answering because this is so unfair, Mr. Chairman.
Breaks our rules and customs.
Mr. Chairman.
Aye.
Mr. Chairman, the votes are 11 yeas and 8 nays.
Okay. Motion carried. I'll go to my opening statement now. We have an agenda with 10 judges who are ready to be voted on. Brett Kavanaugh nominated to the Supreme Court. Jonathan Kobus nominated the 8th Circuit and 8 district court judges. We also have 2 bills on the agenda. We will hold over S 3178, the Justice for Victims of Lynching Act. We will vote on S 2785, the DTARE Act, sponsored by Senators Durbin and Graham. This bill combats offensive election interference by foreign adversaries by denying entry to any foreign national who has been deemed to engage in election interference. The amendment I'll be introducing makes clear that the Secretary of Homeland Security will make this decision on who has engaged in election interference in consultation with the Attorney General, the Director of National Intelligence, and the Secretary of State. Any foreign national who engages or conspires to engage in improper interference in our elections should not be allowed to enter our country under any circumstances except to stand trial. Yesterday, we heard testimony from Dr. Christine Blasey Ford and Judge Kavanaugh regarding sexual assault allegations that date back to when the two were in high school. It was difficult and emotional for both of them. At the end of the day, the 3 witnesses Dr. Ford named denied any knowledge of the event she described. Judge Kavanaugh forcefully denied the allegations. The alleged behavior is inconsistent with everything else we know about him. Hundreds of people, including women he knew in high school, attested to his character and fundamental decency as a person, both in high school and now. He is widely regarded as an excellent husband, father, friend, coach, professor, and judge. He has an exemplary record of being at the forefront of women's advancement in the legal profession, and he's been through 6 FBI full-time background investigations, and no issues of sexual misconduct were uncovered. It It's a fundamental aspect of fairness and due process that the accuser have the burden of proving allegations. It's true yesterday's hearing was not a trial, but trials have rules based on common sense notions of fairness and due process, not the other way around. A person had allegations made against him in a public way, and his reputation and livelihood were at stake. It was only fair that his accuser had the burden of proof. In my opinion, this wasn't met. Hey, you folks that are photographers know that you're supposed to sit down. Maybe you just ought to leave the room if you don't know what the rules are. I found Dr. Ford's testimony credible and believe she's sincere in her version of the facts. But I also found Judge Kavanaugh's testimony credible and sincere. Ultimately, the existing evidence, including the statement of 3 alleged eyewitnesses named by Dr. Ford, refutes Dr. Ford's version of the facts. There is simply no reason to deny Judge Kavanaugh a seat on the Supreme Court on the basis of evidence presented to us. I reopened the hearing at the assistance of Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh. Dr. Ford wanted to be heard, and we gave her that opportunity. Not one question to Dr. Ford was disrespectful in any way. She was treated with courtesy and dignity as I promised her. But the questions my Democrat colleagues asked Judge Kavanaugh were unequivocally and universally hostile. My colleagues first claimed that the Senate doesn't confirm Supreme Court nominees in midterm elections. The Washington Post fact checker said that's false. Indeed, Justice can we have quiet, please? I would expect the same quiet for other people on the committee when they speak. Anyway, indeed, Justice Breyer and Kagan were both confirmed in midterm elections. Then the second attempt was to argue that we needed to request all Judge Kavanaugh's executive branch records. But they completely ignored the fact that we did not request all of Justice Kagan's executive branch records. Indeed, her most recent and relevant executive branch records from the Solicitor General's office were not requested, even despite the fact that Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most Even though Judge Kavanaugh has spent the last 12 years on the second most powerful court in the country, issuing 307 opinions and joining hundreds of others, we received over 480,000 pages of documents from Judge Kavanaugh's time on the executive branch. This was more pages of such documents than the last 5 Supreme Court nominees combined. In short, it was the most thorough and transparent confirmation process at all. I'm going to put the rest of my statement in the record because I'm sure a lot of people are irritated right now, and I'll let them express that irritation. We'll go by seniority, so I'll call on Senator Feinstein and put the rest of my statement in the record.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm very disappointed that we're here today voting on this nomination, especially in light of the testimony that we heard just yesterday. My Republican colleagues spent their time at the hearing focused exclusively on policy and on partisanship and process. The majority argued that the sexual assault Dr. Ford experienced was nothing more than a Democratic smear campaign that I am allegedly orchestrating. My staff and I were accused of leaking Dr. Ford's letter, which we did not. We were accused of leaking Deborah Ramirez's letter, which we did not. We were said to have refused to participate in the partisan, quote, investigation, end quote. Yet it is the Republicans who have refused to talk to Debbie Ramirez or Julie Swetnick. Republicans also failed to mention Democrats were not notified and had no idea the chairman's staff had been communicating with Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, Leland Kaiser, and apparently at least 2 other individuals who have not been named. Instead, Democrats learned about this outreach when various letters or emails appeared in the press. And in one case, we learned about the Republican staff outreach at 10 p.m. the night before the hearing. Ironically, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have gone so far as to say this whole situation was nothing more than a nefarious attempt at political theater. I understand why they did that. The Senate is a political body. However, I was shocked to see Judge Kavanaugh take the same tone and strategy. Candidly, in the 25 years on this committee, I have never seen a nominee for any position behave in that manner. Judge Kavanaugh used as much political rhetoric as my Republican colleagues, and what's more, he went on the attack. He yelled at Democrats for having the temerity to express our frustration for not having access to over 90% of his record, and said that some Democratic members were, quote, an embarrassment, end quote. He'd accused Democrats of, quote, lying in wait, end quote, and replacing, quote, advice and consent with search and destroy, end quote. He even went so far as to say that Dr. Ford's allegations were nothing more than, quote, a calculated and orchestrated political hit, fueled with apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and the 2018 election, end quote, and, quote, revenge on behalf of the Clintons, end quote. Unbelievable. This was not someone who reflected an impartial temperament or the fairness and even-handedness one would see.
Corey Gardner received an anonymous letter with no postmark, and he brought it over to the committee several days ago about an alleged incident in 1998 in a restaurant with no details of who it was and no postmark, but he felt like he should turn it over. All I can say is an anonymous letter, if that can make news and affect the outcome of a committee, we're really going to destroy the process. What bothers me about NBC is that you ran with it. And what bothers me more, somebody on their side gave it to you. You would never have done that with a Democratic nominee. To my friends at NBC, don't write off conservative concerns about NBC to Roger Ailes. You need to think long and hard about what you did. About the invitation, the customs of the committee. Chairman Grassley bent over backward to make sure that Ms. Ford could be heard at a time of her choosing, at a location of her choosing, and I was stunned to hear from Ms. Ford, Dr. Ford, that she did not know it was available to her to testify in California under the conditions that she would request. I find that almost impossible to believe, and I don't doubt her, but I've got communications where that offer was made numerous times. Why wasn't it accepted? It's inconsistent with the debacle we witnessed yesterday, and it's inconsistent with moving this thing forward. It's all about delay. So to my good friend, Senator Leahy, I don't want to hear any more about the customs of this committee. I don't want to hear any more about an FBI investigation. If you really wondered what the FBI could or should do, you would have come forward in a timely manner. The FBI is not going to tell us any more than we know now. As to the accusations, I went through all 5, and I would say this. There are no statute of limitations in Maryland regarding sexual assault. So if somebody wanted to pursue this case, they could go to the appropriate officials in Maryland. If you could find out what town it happened and when it happened, and you can make a complaint against Judge Kavanaugh. And if that complaint is taken to a court and he's convicted, I will be the first one to say we need to look at Judge Kavanaugh. I will be in the NBA before that happens. That's the way you handle allegations. Everything about this, in my view, has been the lowest point of the committees since I've been here, and it's just rank with politics, and nobody really cared about Dr. Ford, and nobody really cared about Brett Kavanaugh. And when I hear my Democratic colleagues openly say, if we can delay this past the midterms, we take back the Senate, we keep this Senate unfilled, this seat unfilled. Disgusting.
I'm here standing with my colleagues because it's very clear that the Republicans will break every norm, every rule to get this person on the Supreme Court, where he will be there with a cloud, he will weaken the court, and this has got to stop. So I walked out. I'm not going to participate in this charade anymore.
You know, one of our colleagues talked about this being a sham. This is a sham, what's going on in there right now. Democrats are not being heard. They're pushing through this process, and frankly, the statements yesterday were about bullying fellow senators, and from top to bottom, this has been about bullies. Listen to the people. All we have asked for is that there be an FBI investigation. Dr. Ford came in and she poured out her heart. She cooperated with the process. She gave the process dignity and respect. The least we could do is give her the dignity and respect of having a process that has credibility. We are talking about putting somebody on the United States Supreme Court for a lifetime. For the sake of our democracy and the integrity of our democracy, you would think that members of the United States Senate would say, wait a minute, there's enough here to push pause. Let's reflect on what we're about to do. This is not a statement about the best of who we are in terms of a system that is about to be and is supposed to be about justice.
I am here to join my colleagues in objecting to the sham process that is going forward right now, right next to us in the Judiciary Committee. This adds to the sequence of sham process that we have seen. I think it is unprecedented in the history of background investigations for new and credible allegations to come forward and the background investigation not be reopened. All three credible allegations have received zero investigation by the FBI. That is not right. The partisanship that was on display in yesterday's hearing was not right. It was not right from my colleagues. It was particularly not right from the nominee. I have never seen such a display of vengeful, partisan, conspiracy theory behavior from somebody seeking any judgeship, let alone a seat on the Supreme Court. And now we have this sham process in the committee, which raises the question, why? Why are they so desperate to get this person on the court without a proper investigation? Thanks.
What we're watching is a betrayal. It is, first and foremost, a betrayal of the United States Senate's constitutional duty to advise and consent. That duty can be done only if we uncover all of the facts, good or bad, about a nominee. there has been no adequate FBI investigation. There has been no sufficient fact-finding. There has been barely a process of considering the people who ought to be heard. Yesterday, we heard from a powerfully credible sexual assault survivor. This process betrays all the hollow, hypocritical respect that our Republican colleagues said they were going to give her. Ramming through this nomination without hearing from Mark Judge and other relevant witnesses and without any investigation is a betrayal of our promise to those sexual assault victims that they would be heard respectively. And this process is being watched. All of America is watching the United States Senate today, and they should be deeply disappointed, embarrassed, ashamed of supposedly the world's greatest deliberative body sinking to a low that denies sexual assault survivors the right to be heard. There are two that should be called as witnesses. There are other witnesses like Mark Judge who need to be called about this nominee, and there needs to be an FBI investigation. Trained professionals, not the staff of the Judiciary Committee. Trained professionals, not a conclusory six-sentence statement, not even under oath, from the attorney for Mark Judd. The real facts, the real story here has not been told. And make no mistake, the truth will come out about Brett Kavanaugh. It's only a matter of time. The truth will come out.
What is the Democratic plan for the next 24 hours?
The Democratic plan is really a plan that is to reach out to all Americans because people are watching. And I want to acknowledge the presence of all of our friends from the U.S. House of Representatives who are standing with us. The American people have got to rise up and recognize this railroad job for what it is. I have no words left. You know that we've all been very rational and reasonable. We're always being told, why don't you, observe decorum? Are you kidding me?
It can
What
be
you're
summarized
saying
in
there is,
no
okay,
rules,
summarize it.
no rules, no norms,
Yeah.
no respect.
Exactly.
And what we're going to do is make our case to the American people because they will rise up. The American people are on our side. That's what we're going to do in the next 24 hours.
Senator, how much strategizing did you? Will you actually be at the vote at 1:30? Will you be in the room when they vote at 1:30?
I'll be on the floor of the Senate giving the statement that I would have made regarding what a sham this is and how terrible it is to put this person on the Supreme Court with this kind of clout. Don't you think it's bad enough that we have one person on the Supreme Court who got there under this kind of clout? We're going to put another person there without all of the kind of investigation that at the minimum should occur.
So your seats will be empty at 1:30.
Haven't decided yet. You know, this is a
We're going to
moving
do
thing.
our
We're gonna do our best.
constitutional duty in the best way we know.
But let's be clear about something. This is part of the point about them ramming it down. You know, we have a democracy. There should not be tyranny of the majority. We have a democracy. And there has not been a fair process in place from the beginning on this. It should not be about raw power influencing the outcome of a decision that is about not only a statement about what we hold as being precious and important about our system of justice, but who will sit for a lifetime on the United States Supreme Court. And this has been about raw power. You're seeing that in display in this hearing this morning. You've been seeing it from the process from the beginning. Failure to give us the documents. Failure to interview all the witnesses. Failure to give us the ability to do a sufficient background check to know who this individual is. It's been pushing and ramming this thing through because they have the power as opposed to the integrity to say, let the American people know what's about to happen. Have transparency in the system. Have integrity in the system. This is a failure of this body to do what it has always said it's about, which is be deliberative.
How much coordination and
discussion did you all do in advance of yesterday's hearing, and why was there so much focus on the FBI investigation that you were calling for rather than the substance of Judge Kavanaugh's past, his calendar?
You don't think an FBI investigation is at the core of all of this?
Yeah, right.
What have we been saying if not that? We need a minimum investigation. And by the way, we did not coordinate walking out. You know, we feel this in here.
That's right.
Okay, and that's what all the people out there are
Coordination of the line of questioning at yesterday's hearing. Did you all discuss the questions that you would ask Judge Kavanaugh?
What does that matter, really?
We have been calling for an FBI investigation from the time that we first learned about this letter from Dr. Blasey Ford. We have been calling for hearings and additional witnesses from day one. There's nothing novel, and there's no need to coordinate because this point is absolutely obvious to everyone, and it's obvious to the American people that the Senate is ramming through this nomination. The Republican leadership is jamming Judge Kavanaugh through this process without knowing the facts. But eventually the facts will come out, and there will be additional investigation, and the truth will out.
And you have to be clear also that the smoke screens that we're saying. So they put a prosecutor in, right? The person who's from the prosecutor's office in Maricopa County, to give the suggestion that this was a hearing that was about getting into evidence and facts. Well, she said herself, and her protocol says, it's very clear, you don't do this without an investigation. The FBI is an agency of sworn, trained law enforcement officers. They have the ability to do an investigation. So understand the misleading suggestion yesterday that this hearing was sufficient. If this hearing were sufficient, we would not, as a matter of course, have the FBI do a background investigation every time we have a nominee to that court. But yet, when it came to these allegations, they wanted to cut off that process. And you have to ask why. You have to ask that.
You say they have the power, so practically what can you do now?
What we're doing right now.
We're gonna use every tool available.
There's still some senators who have not indicated how they're going to vote. I hope they're searching their souls and will do the right thing. And in fact, there are groups now that have come out who originally supported Judge Kavanaugh.
The ABA has asked for this nomination put on hold. The gold standard, as one of our colleagues referred to them yesterday, has now said the nomination should be put on hold. America is watching as never before.
So if this goes to the floor, you think what could happen? Are you confident that it...
Well, the first question is when and whether they will bring it to the floor. They are going to have to assess whether they have the votes, and we're going to be reaching out to our Republican colleagues who are still undecided.
Senators, was his statement yesterday, his opening statement, too partisan to be a Supreme Court justice?
Oh, I'd say so. I never heard a Supreme Court justice come out and say that there is a vast, basically, left-wing conspiracy to undermine his nomination. Whoever heard of a Supreme Court justice who's supposed to be on the court, to be impartial, to be that political? It was so nakedly political. And when he came up for his nomination hearings in 2006, there were a lot of concerns that he was a political operative, and he showed that in spades yesterday, that is what he is. And we do not need a political operative under this kind of cloud being on the United States Supreme Court.
You know, talking about coordination, what we saw yesterday was a coordinated effort to change the conversation away from the brave, courageous survivor of sexual assault, because her story was so intensely, undeniably credible, to a partisan attack. And what Judge Kavanaugh said yesterday was also a complete change from his saying initially at his first hearing, there's no Republican or Democratic side on the Supreme Court. Now it's a vast left-wing conspiracy out to get him. And that is demeaning and disrespectful to the brave survivors who have stepped forward. It makes them puppets and pawns when in fact they are blatantly and proudly independent and have come forth to tell their story voluntarily on their own initiative.
We're not in the majority. We're not in the majority. We're clearly not in the majority. We'll
You know,
see.
judging by the way they've handled the committee vote so far, the rules don't matter to
They'll
them.
break that.
Right.
Can we just take one more question, if that's okay with my colleagues?
What do you make of the way Republicans have said that Democrats are making Judge Kavanaugh out to have been like Bill Cosby?
I don't even know what that means. Really. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Senators. If I might for a moment. If I might for a moment. Thank you. Thank you. We are House members.
Thank you for coming.
We are House members. If you would allow us to indicate why we marched over today. A woman yesterday, Dr. Ford, as I join my Senate colleagues and applaud them for their distinct leadership. My name is Sheila Jackson Lee, and I have a wealth of House members who are standing here with me. As we march, we said the words, "We are the members of the House. We speak for the people who cannot speak for themselves." And we're reminded, unfortunately, of the walk that was taken in 1991. But now we have the testimony of a woman who was vulnerable about sexual assault that occurred on herself. And we have denied women who were sexually assaulted who could not testify. I want you to hear from members of Congress, and I want to just offer these words. As I sat in the hearing room listening to Dr. Ford, as we just stood up in the hearing room and were asked to leave because we were standing, members of Congress, the pain was without expression. As I later heard and sat as Judge Kavanaugh spoke, I could not believe that minimally there were not members of the Republican Senate that did not have mothers and daughters and sisters and girlfriends and wives that did not feel the pain that I felt as Judge Kavanaugh spoke, and not in any way disrespecting his humanity and his family, but as he began to attack and to suggest that a woman who was terrified was part of a conspiracy. So our call today is for mercy. We're asking somebody, some member of the Republican conference, the Senate conference, to vote no. We're asking senators who are now contemplating. We're asking senators, women, who we have stood with on many issues. We're asking them, on behalf of the American people, on behalf of those who cannot speak for themselves, to vote no. I have two ladies that I'd like to bring up, and then I ask my members, Annie Custer, who have organized this, Debbie Dingle, and then Brenda and Nydia is here, and Carolyn. I don't know, Nydia, you're fine? Lois is here too. And Lois. But you all can come. I'm just not, just, go ahead, Annie.
I'm Congresswoman Annie Custer from New Hampshire. I'm from the Democratic Women's Working Group and the Women's Caucus, and I'm the founder and co-chair of the Bipartisan Task Force to End Sexual Violence. I am a survivor myself. 40 years ago, in a New England fraternity in a college on a very cold night, and I'm here to thank Dr. Ford, and I'm here to reassure all survivors throughout this country. This has been a very difficult week for us and for those who care about us, for our families. This is about the integrity of the United States Supreme Court. The American Bar Association has asked this institution to take a pause. Because the truth of the matter is, we're talking about the highest office in the land. There's no elected office that is for life. And we need the highest moral standard of a person who is truthful, a person who is empathetic, a person who's compassionate to all people, including litigants, and all people across America. His decisions will impact our lives for generations to come. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Lois Franco from Florida, chair of the Democratic Working Women Group. Thank you all for being here. I want to start by just thanking Dr. Ford for her courage. And she is inspirational, and we salute her coming forward. With that said, that is not really necessarily why we marched here today, whether or not you believe her or not. I sat in that room yesterday. I saw 12 angry men. 12 angry men who are about to change the destiny of our children and grandchildren. 11 are sitting there on the judicial panel, and the other angry man is a nominee to the highest judicial court in the nation. And we think it's very clear that we need to take a pause and we need an investigation, because there'll be a lot of angry Americans, and we represent millions of them. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Brenda Lawrence, and I represent the Michigan 14th District, and honored to be the Vice Chair of the Women's Caucus. I am here today because the American people elect us to perform certain duties, and the Senate has the responsibility of picking a person who is qualified to serve on the Supreme Court. Yesterday, we saw clearly that Kavanaugh does not have the decorum, the ability to be objective, the ability to have the tenacity through hearings and looking at data. He became very partisan and emotional. I have never seen a Supreme Court justice behave in that manner. He may have some redeeming qualities, but he does not have the standard that we set for the Supreme Court. And when I heard another woman tell her story, we cannot sit here in America and tell millions of women across this country that you're a joke, that you won't be heard. We are America. We stand here as women and representatives of the U.S. House of Representatives. And I demand, and I really ask my senators to send us a qualified, dignified, objective Supreme Court nominee. Thank you.
Let me step in and ask the press to be tolerant of us. We are members of the House, and you have heard from Michigan, Florida, from New Hampshire. And so we're going to ask the members to say their states. We're going to do this very quickly so we can answer your questions. But I want to say to you that the members that are standing here, and over 50-plus members of the United States House of Representatives, endorsed the Violence Against Women Act, but were rebuffed by Republicans. We come here and we find an atmosphere of rejection of the understanding of the pain of women. So each woman will come forward. They will say their home state, and they'll say a word. And I just want to finish by saying, I hope that there will not be a stain on the Supreme Court, and that there will be those who have the courage to be able to stand up and speak on behalf of the totality of the American people and the women that have sought to seek relief. Let me yield to Carolyn Maloney. Would you all please say your state and then come forward, please?
I'm Congresswoman Carolyn Maloney. I'm a former co-chair of the Women's Caucus, and I'm from New York State, New York 12. The hearings have been the most partisan in the history of our country. They've transformed what was a reasonable review of candidates into a partisan attack. I am introducing legislation today that if one senator requests an FBI investigation on credible evidence, then it must be granted in this important review process. Also, I'm introducing legislation that would require them to put up all their records. The Kagan standard, that 99% of her records were put on the internet for all Americans to read. That should be the standard going forward. Only 10% of Brett Kavanaugh's records have been put up. And I will say that after the credible, moving testimony of Dr. Ford, they then began attacking. They couldn't attack her. They started attacking the ranking member, another woman, Dianne Feinstein, who responded to what her constituent wanted. She did not reveal this information. They have now attacking her credibility and her professionalism. It is an outrage. It is an attack on the respect of women in this country, and we need to bring some changes that respect women and their work and their word and sexual assault against them.
Thank you. Jerry Nadler, please.
Thank you. I'm Jerry Nadler of New York. I'm the ranking Democratic member of the Judiciary Committee in the House. This whole process is a stain on the Supreme Court and on the Senate. The idea that you would vote on a Supreme Court nominee with serious allegations against him without properly vetting those allegations, without having at least an FBI investigation, without hearing from the various witnesses, a nominee who called one of the women who made serious allegations against him a joke. And the idea that you'd vote without getting to the bottom of this is a disgrace and just shows the absolute determination to place whoever they want on the Supreme Court for ideological reasons, regardless of the person's qualifications, regardless of the person's possible criminal activity, and certainly regardless of evidence and without wanting to know. That is a disgrace to the Senate.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm Julia Brownlee. I represent the 26th District in California, all the good people of Ventura County, and I will be very, very brief. We are all standing united to ask for a pause, to do the investigation, and to get to the truth. We're asking for a few more days. If the Senate moves forward on this vote today, let's be clear, justice will be denied.
I'm Debbie Wasserman Schultz. I represent the 23rd District in South Florida. Yesterday, my 19-year-old daughter texted me as the hearing began and asked me, "Mom, please tell me that this man is not going to get confirmed, because if he does, I will lose all faith in government." As she live texted me, and she's a college student, as she live texted me throughout the day while she was riveted to her laptop watching the hearing, she asked me, why won't they just open the investigation? Why won't they just get to the bottom of what really happened? Try to get more facts. How is that fair? It was so clear to me that the women of this country, the young women of this country, are treated as second-class citizens in almost every way. And it pained me to tell my daughter that one of the last isms, sexism, to fall in our country will be the discrimination and abuse of women. Women should be believed. Our young women should feel like they have an equal and fair shot at anything they experience in this country. And yesterday's sham hearing showed that that is not the case. And I am so angry and disappointed in Jeff Flake, because for him to say in his statement that there was some kind of too high standard that Judge Kavanaugh was being held to yesterday, and that what we really need is more evidence, well, then he should be leading the way to call for a reopening of the FBI investigation so we can get to the facts. Then the senators would have the opportunity to make a fair decision. Thank you.
I'm Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky from a district in the city of Chicago. So the president said yesterday, now America can see why I nominated this man. Well, you know what? I agree with that, because the statements of Brett Kavanaugh were clearly unhinged. They were partisan beyond belief. They were sexist. How about the treatment of Senator Klobuchar? Really? He's going to bully her in a hearing about sexual assault on his part? I also want to say that what is the message that is being sent to young men and boys, high school kids? That it's okay, forget it, especially if you go to an elite school, that you are able to do whatever you want because years from now, you too could be on the highest court of the land. There's also evidence, by the way, that he lied in his in the nomination hearings when he was a candidate for the district court. Where's the emphasis on that? That he actually lied to Congress at that time. We saw a spectacle yesterday that showed the kind of bullying, the kind of sexism, and the kind of politicization of a process. Shame on the Republicans for allowing this to move forward without a further investigation. And we should just see Judge Kavanaugh pull himself away. He should disqualify himself, and if not, then the Senate has to do it.
We have a few more members that are coming up. I just want to indicate that we have a gentleman here, so we want to make sure that we get the gentleman in to answer Senator Lindsey Graham's comment that he voted for two former senators, nominees by President Obama. None of them, Justice Kagan's and Justice Sotomayor, had these allegations. And so it is no comparison at all.
I'm Congresswoman Joyce Beatty from the great state of Ohio. My message is simple. Today I join not only my colleagues, but women and men across this nation standing for justice, asking for integrity, asking for an open investigation. Let us not forget that this appointment is a lifetime appointment. So it is not just for the present, it is for the future. It is for my grandchildren and those yet unborn that we stand today saying we stand for the people.
Amen.
Thank you.
I'm Suzanne Bonamici from the state of Oregon. And I say, as a policymaker and as a mother, to Dr. Blasey Ford, thank you so much for your courage as a survivor to come forward and tell your important story. But yesterday was a sad day for this country and for our institutions, because to watch Brett Kavanaugh, Judge Kavanaugh yesterday, get angry and be partisan while being considered for a lifetime appointment on the United States Supreme Court. So to our senators, even if you doubted Dr. Blasey Ford, and I believe Dr. Blasey Ford, but even if you doubted, please listen to the American Bar Association. Listen to the women and the people across this country who are saying, stop, get the facts. We cannot have someone who is an angry partisan on our United States Supreme Court. Imagine the parties who appear before Judge Kavanaugh after watching him yesterday. Stop this procedure. Let's start over and find someone for the United States Supreme Court who is worthy of a lifetime appointment.
Congresswoman Val Demings, a former chief of police.
I'm Val Demings. I represent the 10th Congressional District in Florida. I served 27 years in law enforcement, had the honor of serving as the chief of police. And let me just say this, today is a very sad day for America. I've spent a lot of time, almost all of my adult life, trying to right a lot of wrongs in America. And I have to say, I am so disappointed. I think things go wrong in our country when good men and women fail to do their job, whether they are members of the Senate, the House and law enforcement or on the judiciary. It is quite disappointing to listen to Senator Grassley, had an opportunity to get it right 27 years later, failed. Senator Hatch had an opportunity to get it right 27 years later, failed yet again. Clearly disappointed in Senator Flake, but are we shocked, really? When it's all about you, that's what you do. Lindsey Graham, disappointing. When good men and women fail to do their jobs wherever they are, we have bad days in America. Look, Judge Kavanaugh is applying for a job. As a police chief, if I was looking at a candidate to be a police officer, someone who had the authority to take your freedoms away, and he or she presented the resume, the allegations that we have before us, what would your stories be if I hired him to do the job of a law enforcement officer? Why would we hire someone with multiple allegations of sexual assault to sit on the highest court in the land? Now, surely we can do better than that. And if these cast of characters in here will not do their jobs, my faith, my hope rests in the American people to rise up and do not accept the crap that is being forced upon you. Thank you.
My name is Juan Vargas. I represent the 51st Congressional District in San Diego, and I'm here for a simple reason, and that is I believed her. I listened to her yesterday, Dr. Ford, and I believed her.
Yes, thank you.
I believed her.
Thank you.
And I looked at him, and I thought, what would this guy be like with a few beers in him? The outrage that he had, his demeanor, and drunk, I believed her even more.
Thank you. Annette?
I'm Congressmember Nanette Berrigan. I represent California's 44th Congressional District. I was in the room yesterday when Dr. Ford was testifying, and what I thought was pretty remarkable is how on the left side of the dais, not only were there no women, but the response to hearing the testimony, the disinterest amongst some of the senators in even hearing what was said, kind of looking at the clock, just waiting for the thing to be over, almost as saying like, yeah, we're doing this just to do this, but not really to listen, not really to make an informed decision on what Dr. Ford had to say. And so to be in that room and to see that was disappointing. And then, of course, to then see and hear some of the remarks by the senators once Brett Kavanaugh started to speak, just reconfirmed my concern on that. It was just a show. It was just to allow her to come in and speak, but there was a prejudgment already made. Now, when I came to listen to Dr. Ford, I came with an open mind, and I said, let me see what I hear. Let me see if there's anything that she says that gives me any doubt. And I didn't hear any of that yesterday. What I heard was heartbreaking. A woman who was sharing her story, who was so brave and coming forward and sharing her story, who had everything to lose, really, and nothing to gain. And so to see how she was treated, to hear how she was treated, and then to see this disparity and how Brett Kavanaugh was treated yesterday compared to her was pretty remarkable. It is a sad day, as my colleagues have mentioned, a sad day today that we're rushing this through. People have said, oh, will you support her because you're a Democrat? That is a mischaracterization of what is happening here, right? When you think about President Trump's prior nominee, went to the same school, we didn't have this issue. This wasn't the same thing. We also didn't have multiple women who stepped up, who said, I was assaulted. And a day and an age like today, during the Me Too movement, this is taking us backwards. It's not taking us forward. It's sending the message again that maybe you shouldn't speak. Why? Because this is how you're going to be treated. You are going to become the person who we're going to go after, and that is wrong. And that's why I'm here today. I heard the testimony of Dr. Ford in the room. I believe her. And because of that, I think we need to have an FBI investigation. There is no good reason not to have an investigation, to gather facts, to talk to other witnesses, and to get to the bottom of the truth. And that's what I believe we deserve when we are assessing the next Supreme Court justice. Thank you.
I'm going to close, and I'm going to thank all my House members who came today. I finish on this point. Should we go down the same journey that the administration is going down in dismissing the Department of Justice, dismissing the FBI, and having a justice or a judge try to diminish the work of the FBI by suggesting their 302 reports, and that's all they are? And everybody knows that when the FBI investigates, whether it is a background check, it is a meticulous matching of the facts. And as a ranking member on the Criminal Justice Committee, I believe that we have diminished institutions. We have seen the three blind mice that hear nothing, see nothing, and say nothing in the body politic of Republicans. I pray, as I said, that 2 women will stand up and be heard with a vote no against an individual that if they wish to bring him back, which is their prerogative, to nominate him again, then let it be with a full airing of all of those who seek to be heard and to eliminate the pain and the stain that is on this process. With that, I will take a question. I think we're having votes in the House. Yes, sir.
If Democrats take
You
back
are with
ABC News, John Parkinson with ABC News. Do you believe that if Democrats take back the House, that they should consider reopening this issue and holding hearings, examining this whole issue from front to back? And do you think that it's worth proceeding to impeachment process with a justice?
Well, first of all, I think all of my colleagues are going home to do their best to present themselves to their constituents, and we don't know what's going to happen in November. What I would say to you is the collective body of members of Congress and the United States Senate, the House and the Senate, have an obligation to the people of the United States to do due diligence and oversight. And I would venture to say that the interest in oversight over this process, but someone told me to stop talking about process, and I agree with them. To talk about a woman who came here who was terrified and talked about her sexual assault. And so if members have a conscience, then whether you're Republican or Democrat, we come back here in whatever majority that we're in.
Amplifying all the work, so we're trying to make sure that we don't want to get peddled by the cops right now. We want to be able to have a good thing in a few minutes. So it's going to
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Harris.
We have some members here. There's a few of us here.
Thank you
Hey guys, can everybody take a step backwards so we can breathe? We need them to have their voice and their oxygen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We love you.
You know, when Kamala and I looked at each other, and we just knew in our hearts what we had to do, and I have no words left, Kamala, for what is happening, and this committee and the Republicans have just forgotten all norms, all rules to push this person fast forward to the.
And somebody needs to ask the question to her lawyers, how could she not know about this? Are you beginning to understand what's been going on for a very long time in this case? It's not that hard to figure out. So if this is the new standard, the accusation proves itself to those who want to ask questions. You hate women. God help us all. If the new standard for the committee is that there is no presumption of anything, that you have to prove why somebody would accuse you, not just say, I didn't do it, and here's why I didn't do it, but you got to prove the motives of your accuser. God help us all. The Avenatti moment tells you what's going to happen if we keep this farce going. Plenty of time, plenty of opportunities to get to the truth. This has never been about the truth. This has been about delay and destruction. And if we reward this, it is the end of good people wanting to be judges. It is the end of any concept of the rule of law. It's the beginning of a process that will tear this country apart. And if I am chairman next year, if we keep the majority and Senator Grassley moves over, and I hope he doesn't because I think he's done a great job, I'm going to remember this. There's the process before Kavanaugh and the process after Kavanaugh. If you want to vet the nominee, you can. If you want to delay things for the next election, you will not. If you try to destroy somebody, you will not get away with it. And Jeff is leaving. He has wrestled with this. He is trying to be fair. I cannot tell you, Jeff, what happened 35 years ago. I can tell you this, that through any legal system, this thing would not get out of the batter's box, and that everything I know about Judge Kavanaugh screams that this didn't happen, and all the other things. So, to my good friends on the other side who are struggling, I think an FBI investigation is going to do nothing. It's not going to tell you any more than we know now. It's going to just keep it going and going and going till he breaks and he won't, until the next 5 come forward. I'm going to vote yes. And I'm going to tell his 2 daughters that I'm proud of your dad, and I really, really believe he's a good man. And I'm going to tell Dr. Ford, I am sorry you had to go through this too.
Senator Durbin. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thursday was an historic day in a Senate committee with more than its fair share of history. In our deliberations over the nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh to fill the vacancy on the Supreme Court, we have confronted some of the most serious charges ever leveled against a nominee. Those charges were made at a moment in our nation's history when we are living through a cultural revolution. Women in America are not only emerging into more and more positions of responsibility, they are now airing grievances over sexual harassment and abuse at every level of society. Caught in the vortex of this cultural shift, there is not a person in this room who can truly measure the trajectory or ultimate outcome of this historic change. America is marching forward in the pursuit of justice for women in this country. Sadly, many on the Senate Judiciary Committee are still mired in the dead space it was 27 years ago during the Clarence Thomas nomination hearing. Yesterday in this room, America saw this inflammatory issue in real time, in real life. Dr. Christine Blasey Ford was credible, cooperative, and resolute. When I asked her directly, under oath, the degree of certainty that she had that she was assaulted by Brett Kavanaugh, she responded 100%. When the prosecutor on the Republican side tried to weave a political conspiracy or make her a tool of her lawyers, it fell flat. This woman, who who had identified Brett Kavanaugh as her assailant to her husband and therapist 6 years ago, believed she had a responsibility as a citizen to come forward and tell her story. I thought about the words she used during the course of her testimony yesterday. The word she used more often than not to describe her motives was helpful. Helpful. She wanted to be helpful to this committee and to her nation. I believe her. But she was afraid in awakening those carefully guarded and painful memories, and she was afraid for her family. She confided in our colleague Dianne Feinstein with the clear understanding that Dianne would protect her identity, and I have no doubt that Dianne accepted that responsibility and kept her word. Yesterday, 2 members of this committee leveled personal attacks at Senator Feinstein. They said she concealed Dr. Ford's letter for partisan reasons, and one went so far as to say that she leaked the contents of that letter, or her staff leaked that letter, to the press. Perhaps in this Trumpian era, those sorts of baseless personal charges are to be expected. But if we descend to this level of political discourse, we will have forsaken the traditions of the Senate and the comedy which is essential to our public service. And for the record, this baseless claim was refuted immediately by The Intercept, which was first to publish the story about Dr. Ford's allegation. Their reporter said last night, and I quote, "Feinstein's staff did not leak the letter to The Intercept." Yesterday, Dr. Ford made the personal decision to tell her story publicly. She came before this committee under oath and volunteered to answer every question. None of the Republicans on this committee were willing to question or confront her, not one. They sat silent as their prosecutor, Ms. Mitchell, tried to do their work. But after Dr. Ford completed her testimony and left the building, it was a different story. Last night on a TV show, one senator said, and I quote, "Ms. Ford has got a problem, and destroying Judge Kavanaugh's life won't fix her problem." How could you listen to her honest and direct testimony and draw that conclusion? Judge Kavanaugh's opening statement yesterday was filled with raw emotion. Looking at his family and friends gathered to support him, one could not help but feel, as our colleague Senator Flake reminded us, that this undertaking is deeply personal and there's humanity to reconcile on both sides of the ledger. I could feel the intensity of what he has experienced over the last few weeks, but I could not understand how Judge Kavanaugh could say that he, quote, "bore no ill will towards Dr. Ford," then called her charges, quote, "a calculated, orchestrated political hit," citing, quote, "apparent pent-up anger about President Trump and his 2016 election," and, quote, "revenge on behalf of the Clintons." Revenge on behalf of the Clintons. This lock-her-up grace note in Judge Kavanaugh's remarks may have raised a cheer in the White House, but it's a sad moment in the history of this committee. The exchange I had with Judge Kavanaugh was an honest effort to loose the Gordian knot this committee faces when 2 sworn witnesses are in direct contradiction. What I asked for, what many have asked for, is obvious. Turn over the facts we know to the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Let them connect the dots. Let them complete the investigation. Then let us meet and evaluate their findings. Do you remember yesterday when on several occasions the Republicans made a point of quoting the American Bar Association? Mr. Chairman, I would like permission.
Objection, it'll be entered.
Let me read it. This is what the committee received. The American Bar Association urges the Senate Judiciary Committee, and as appropriate, the full Senate, to conduct a confirmation vote on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination to the Supreme Court of the United States only after an appropriate background check into the allegations made by Professor Ford and others is completed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation. We make this request because of the ABA's respect for the rule of law and due process under law. The basic principles that underscore the Senate's constitutional duty of advice and consent on federal judicial nominees require nothing less than a careful examination of the accusations and facts by the FBI. Each appointment to our nation's highest court, as with all others, is simply too important to rush to a vote. Deciding to proceed without conducting additional investigation would not only have a lasting impact on the Senate's reputation, but it will also negatively affect the great trust necessary for the American people to have in the Supreme Court. It must remain an institution that will reliably follow the law and not politics. Respectfully, the Senate should recognize that a thorough FBI investigation will demonstrate its commitment to a Supreme Court that is above reproach. That letter was signed by Robert Carlson, President of the American Bar Association. All the quotes yesterday about the ABA's finding on Judge Kavanaugh are a distant second to what we've been asked by the same organization to do, and it is not an unreasonable request. So who is telling the truth? Two sworn witnesses in direct contradiction. But there is one significant difference. One of these sworn witnesses has stepped forward and said, I will submit my testimony and myself to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, understanding that anyone who lies to the Federal Bureau of Investigation is subject to criminal prosecution. The other witness evaded that question over and over and over. Oh, I'll leave it up to the committee. It's up to the chairman. You're going to have to decide on that. You make that decision. Judge Kavanaugh knows better. He knows that if he had turned yesterday to the White House counsel and says, suspend this until we have an FBI investigation to clear my name, my reputation, and my nomination to this court, it was the right thing to do. Because those scales had been tipped in favor of the one sworn witness who is willing to take her case before the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I will be voting no on the nomination of Brett Kavanaugh to the Supreme Court.
Before I call on Senator Cornyn, since the ABA letter came up, I have this comment that the president of the ABA called for an FBI investigation, as you just heard, and to do it before a vote. I've explained many times another FBI investigation is not necessary. The ABA is an outside organization like any other that can send us letters and share their advice, but we're not going to let them dictate our committee's business. Also, this letter is from the president of the ABA, one individual. He doesn't represent the hundreds of thousands of lawyers in the United States. It isn't at all clear that the ABA president has authority to speak for the organization on this matter. This letter doesn't say that he conferred with anyone else or that he convened the Judicial Qualification Committee by conference call or otherwise. The ABA president's opinion doesn't alter the fact that Judge Kavanaugh received a very well qualified rating from the ABA Standing Committee on the Federal Judiciary, and the Standing Committee did not join this letter. Senator Cornyn.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've said before that I believe that in considering Dr. Ford's testimony, we should treat her the same way I would want my wife, my daughters, or my mother treated if they were in similar circumstances. Conversely, I want to make sure we treat Judge Kavanaugh the same way we would treat my father, my brother, or a son. We owe that to both Judge Kavanaugh and to Dr. Ford. It is simply false to say that somehow we have, in drawing attention to the fact that this has been an orchestrated effort to delay the vote on this nomination, that we have somehow been disrespectful of Dr. Ford. I'm proud of the way this committee treated Dr. Ford yesterday. I thought it was appropriate, dignified, and apparently our friends across the aisle are somehow upset that we got a trained lawyer who handles claims like this on a daily basis to handle it in a thoughtful, appropriate way to elicit facts and information from Dr. Ford. I thought Ms. Mitchell did a good job. But to somehow wrap themselves in the normal compassion we would somehow, that we do feel for somebody in Dr. Ford's situation, and claim that we are not treating her well by pointing out the overt politicalization of this process, is simply trying to take our eye off the ball. There has been a calculated effort to manipulate this process in a way that is blatantly unfair to Dr. Ford and to Judge Kavanaugh, and that's shameful. I said yesterday, I think this is one of the darkest days for the United States Senate since the McCarthy hearings that occurred back in the 50s. You may recall the comments of one of the lawyers who said, "I never really gauged your cruelty or recklessness before today," and asked Senator McCarthy, "Have you no sense of decency?" I think this process has been cruel and reckless and indecent for both Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh, and it did not have to be that way. When we learned yesterday from Dr. Ford that she did not authorize the release of the letter of July 30 that she sent to Senator Feinstein, she did not authorize it, she did not want it leaked, but it was leaked. And she said the only people that had possession of it were her lawyers, Senator Feinstein, and Representative Eshoo. You can reach your own conclusion, but the letter had to come from somewhere. And when she testified that she was not informed of Chairman Grassley's offer to travel where she was to interview her with bipartisan participation about her claims, she said it wasn't clear to her that offer had ever been made. So when the letter was leaked by somebody, when the offer to interview her before a bipartisan panel of investigators at a place and time of her choosing out of the public eye, when that was not communicated, it sure looks to me, at least the circumstantial evidence would seem to point to the desire to have exactly what we had yesterday and to contribute to what has been described as accurately as a circus atmosphere. Cruel, reckless, no sense of decency. I would point to the fact that Judge Kavanaugh said as long as this nomination has been pending, you've seen a trend toward more and more scurrilous, salacious, and uncorroborated allegations being made against him, all of which the chairman and the committee professional staff have attempted to investigate. We heard from Dr. Ford. We also saw a claim by Ms. Ramirez that was uncorroborated by the dozens of witnesses that allegedly existed, that the New York Times could not confirm. Nobody would confirm her allegation. And then yesterday, the ranking member quoted from some of the claims of Ms. Swetnick, represented by Mr. Avenatti. And I was struck by the fact that some of the allegations made in the statement by Ms. Swetnick that we got on September the 25th, 2018, accused Mark Judge and Brett Kavanaugh to gang rape high school girls at a time when Miss Swetnick was in college and says she went back to parties in high school where girls were gang raped, not on one occasion, not on two occasions. She said she went to 10 such parties. I'm shocked that our colleagues would embrace this kind of uncorroborated, outrageous, salacious allegation, considering the facts and the timing and the representation by Stormy Daniels' lawyer, obviously eager for more public attention and notoriety. But you didn't hear that in the quote from the ranking member yesterday when she quoted from some of the allegations made by Ms. Swetnick. Our friend, the ranking member, said yesterday that the integrity of the Senate is on trial. I agree with that. And we're failing badly. Cruelty, recklessness, indecency toward the people we should be treating with respect and dignity. That extends to Mark Judge. Isn't it obvious what is happening here with Mark Judge? He has submitted a statement under penalty of felony saying that Brett Kavanaugh and I were friends in high school, but we've not spoken for several years. I do not recall the events described by Dr. Ford in her testimony before the United States Senate Judiciary Committee today. He submitted that statement yesterday. He said, I never saw Brett act in the manner Dr. Ford describes. I am knowingly submitting this letter under penalty of felony. So he says he has nothing more to offer. He submitted his statement under penalty of felony. But here's the other part. He admits to be a recovering alcoholic, as well as a cancer survivor. He said he struggles with depression and anxiety, so much that he avoids public speaking. Yet our colleagues across the aisle believe that the appropriate course of conduct is to drag Mr. Judge into this circus-like atmosphere and to subject his battle with alcoholism and addiction to public investigation and scrutiny and ridicule. That is cruel. That is reckless. That is indecent. So, Mr. Chairman, in conclusion, I believe this is a calculated effort to delay the vote. I think the evidence all points to that. And the longer we go without voting, it's clear to me that people like Mr. Avenatti and others eager to get attention and willing to peddle the most salacious, uncorroborated, outrageous allegations against this nominee, that we'll continue to see more of the same. It's well known that about 150 nominations are pending on the Senate calendar. If there's been one thing that's been the hallmark of our colleagues' conduct across the aisle during the time of the Trump administration, it's to obstruct, delay, and deny this administration the benefit of the nominees which they have sent to the Senate for advice and consent. That includes not only judges, but all aspects of the federal government. 150 nominations pending on the Senate calendar because even in with uncontroversial nominees, they want to obstruct, delay, and deny this administration the benefit of the people they've chosen to help govern. So it strikes me as entirely consistent with what we have seen on this nomination. And I think it's disgraceful, as Senator Hatch said yesterday. I think the way Dr. Ford and Judge Kavanaugh have been treated is a scandal, and it is cruel, reckless, and indecent.
Senator Whitehouse.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be fairly brief because I announced my intention to vote against Kavanaugh already. Judge Kavanaugh has an unpleasant record, both of associations with and rulings for a powerful array of activist Republican special interests, to whom he gives a 90% win rate. The Supreme Court has an equally unpleasant record of 5-4 partisan rulings for those same big interests. Not 3 or 4 times, not even 1 or 2 dozen times, but under Chief Justice Roberts, 70 times, all 5-4 partisan decisions. The court is flying all the warning flags of a captured agency, dancing to special interest tunes and rampaging through precedent and principle to get there. This will be a disaster for the court, and I believe Kavanaugh will contribute to that disaster. His partisan screed yesterday was telling. As to yesterday, let me be frank. I believe Dr. Ford. I may be wrong, but I believed her. And I believe Kavanaugh dodged and dissembled, ranted and raved, filibustered and prevaricated. I did not find him credible. I don't believe boof is flatulence. I don't believe the Devil's Triangle is a drinking game. And I don't believe calling yourself a girl's alumnus is being her friend. And I think drinking till you Ralph or fall out of the bus or don't remember the game or need to piece together your memory the next day is more consistent with Dr. Ford's and others' testimony than his own. If Dr. Ford's testimony is true, I hope we can all agree Kavanaugh has no business on the court. And I, for one, believed her. But set aside my own belief. As a prosecutor, I am horrified at what the committee has done. Terminating the FBI background investigation before these new allegations were even considered. Doing partisan interviews by partisan staffers declaredly determined to force the nominee through. Letting Kavanaugh's alleged accomplice in the assault, the guy in the room with him when it happened, get away with a lawyer's letter and no testimony, no cross-examination. The lawyers in the room will know the reverence with which Wigmore is cited as legal authority in decisions across the country and for decades. Beyond any doubt, he wrote, the greatest legal engine ever invented for the discovery of truth is cross-examination. Mark Judge is in hiding instead of under subpoena, and that greatest legal engine has been deliberately disabled in this matter. Let me have one example of where investigation might help. Here's Kavanaugh's calendar. Dr. Ford said that Kavanaugh and Judge and PJ and at least one other boy were all at a house. Well, we know Brett Kavanaugh was there because it's his schedule. And here's Judge, and here's PJ. Here are all those three named boys and others at a house together, just as she said. She said Kavanaugh and Judge were drunk and that she had a beer. Skis is brewskis, beer. They were drinking, just as she said. Now, I will concede that the two girls aren't mentioned. But spot me this. If you had just sexually assaulted one of the two girls, would you add the girls' names to your calendar? I doubt it. This may be powerful corroborating evidence that the assault happened, that it happened that day, and that it happened in that place. But with no FBI investigation, we can't tell. That's how you get out of Lindsay's batter's box. You investigate. It's the least thing a sexual assault victim is entitled to when she comes forward. The FBI could interview all the attendees, not just to obtain simple denials, but to cross-check and see if the stories add up. The FBI could see if the house matches the locality and description Dr. Ford gave. The FBI could inquire after and pursue other corroborating or exculpatory evidence. It's what they do. Anybody who has done any serious investigation knows you don't stop just with witness statements of interested parties. You run down corroborating and impeaching evidence. You check and cross-check. You ask and go back again. You do the basic blocking and tackling of investigation. Partisan interviews by political staff predetermined to clear the nominee just aren't the same as real investigators doing real investigation and corroboration. I don't think this has ever happened before in the history of background investigations. Closing out the background investigation without investigating new, credible allegations. You cannot tell me Ms. Ford's allegations weren't credible. They were credible enough to get her before the Senate. And yet she was not given the most basic, decent thing that a witness or victim could be given after they come forward. Sincere or thorough investigation. closing out the background investigation without investigating new, credible allegations, not any of 3 allegations, all from women demonstrably in Kavanaugh's social circle. Look at this ridiculous letter from the other alleged assailant in the room. And it's equally ridiculous, yesterday's fig leaf, I guess you'd call it, where the same statement is repeated, just this time with his signature on it. And ask yourself, do you think investigator Kavanaugh would have tolerated letters like this from the third person in the room had there been one with Mr. Clinton and Ms. Lewinsky? Never in a million years. And yet this is what we're supposed to satisfy ourselves with in this matter. It is preposterous to anyone who's ever done serious investigation. Yet this is what we are left with. We have done a botch of an investigation. Over time, I expect the facts come out. They have a way of doing that. Cover-ups never last. The sand is running through Kavanaugh's hourglass. And I pledge whatever I can do to make sure that the truth of his conduct is ultimately determined. Setting aside this botch, we go back to a Supreme Court far too often dancing to the tune of a handful of big Republican special interests. Big Republican special interests funding the Federalist Society that is now picking Supreme Court nominees. Big Republican special interests using the unlimited dark money power the Supreme Court gave them to mount TV ad campaigns for Supreme Court nominees. Big Republican special interests funding frequent flyer amici, so-called friends of the court, offering constant instruction and encouragement to the 5 Republicans on the Supreme Court, and big Republican special interests on the winning side of those 70 5-4 partisan victories, the fruits of their political labor. People are catching on. The record of this is undeniable. And as I said, it will be a disaster for the court. I yield my time.
I think I should try to clarify about the calendar that Senator Whitehouse put up there. The entry has 6 boys listed for July 1st, 1982. It says go to Timmy's house for skis with Judge, Tom, PJ, Bernie, and Squee. Dr. Ford said there were 4 boys there. The counter entry lists 6 plus Kavanaugh. That's 7. That's the wrong gathering. 2 allegations made by my colleague are incorrect. First, I never terminated an FBI investigation. I didn't have any authority to open or close an FBI investigation. The FBI considers this matter closed. If my colleagues were worried about the partisanship of the investigation, the Democrats could have joined us at every step of the way. However, we all know they declined to participate. Second, we did receive a letter signed by Mark Judge himself under penalty of felony. I read it previously this morning. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's been a lot of talk about the need for an FBI investigation. There are many of us wish that that's where this would have begun, as it should have begun, as it could have begun had these letters been handed over to the FBI with the request that they be investigated at an earlier time, as early as late July or early August. Well, let's talk for a minute about what would have happened had that occurred. Well, they would have gone to Dr. Ford, they would have interviewed her, and they would have prepared a report outlining Dr. Ford's allegations. That report would have reflected more or less what we heard yesterday, probably a more distilled version of that, similar to what we saw in her written statements before she appeared before this committee. They would have gone to Judge Kavanaugh. They would have interviewed Judge Kavanaugh. And Judge Kavanaugh would have told us then, as he told us yesterday, that no such event ever occurred, that he never did this to any woman, not in high school, not in college, not before, not after. They would have gone to the other alleged eyewitnesses to this event, including Mark Judge, Patrick Smith, and Leland Kaiser. They would have taken statements from each of them, and those statements would have indicated, as they have each indicated in written statements submitted to this committee, that they recall no such event ever occurring. And so we have investigated. I, too, wish it had been investigated by the FBI, and had it been investigated by the FBI at the outset, as it could have been, as it should have been, as it would have been when these letters were received, then this could have been handled in a much more dignified manner, in a manner much more respectful to Dr. Ford, in a manner much more respectful to Judge Kavanaugh, and respectful to both of their families and indeed this entire process. Now, some have mentioned today that there was some emotion in the room yesterday. Yes, certainly. These are emotional circumstances. My heart goes out to both Dr. Ford and her family and Judge Kavanaugh and his family. They've both been through a lot. I don't blame either one of them for demonstrating some emotion, not for a moment. In the case of Dr. Ford, clearly she's been through something awful. In the case of Judge Kavanaugh, he in recent days has seen, in addition to this allegation, dragging his name into the public record, he's seen his name dragged through the mud on a lot of other things, including an allegation that he was involved in and, in effect, running a drug distribution and gang rape ring. Now ask yourself the question, if you or someone you love was alleged to have been involved in running something like that, might not you feel a little bit emotional as well? And might not that spill out into your testimony if you were called in front of this committee? Look, we have a job to do here today. Our job yesterday was to hear from Dr. Ford and to hear from Judge Kavanaugh. We've done that. Our job now is to vote. Today, we're going to do that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I said at the first day of the first hearing regarding Judge Kavanaugh that this is not normal. It might look normal. You have the nominee, you have the family behind them, you have all the cameras on, but it wasn't normal. It wasn't normal because this nominee was handpicked by a president who, in just the last week, has gone after his attorney general, threatened to fire the deputy attorney general who's overseeing a major investigation, a national security investigation, handpicked by a president who's constantly undermining law enforcement, constantly undermining the FBI. And yet, this president picked a nominee who has the most expansive view of executive power that we've seen. A president, a view of executive power that, according to his writings and even the case law, says, in his own words, in an opinion, that a president should be able to declare laws unconstitutional. In his own views in legal writings, that a president should be able to be immune from investigation while sitting in office, that we shouldn't have a special counsel statute. So that's where we start. That's the core here as we look at the constitutional issues that we're facing. The second reason this isn't normal is that we did not get the information we needed to make a decision. I come from a state that believes in process. In my old job for 8 years, I headed up the Hennepin County Attorney's Office. We handled, by the way, 12,000 juvenile cases every single year. So I saw cases just like the one we heard about yesterday. But in our role, I would always tell people if we had to let a case go, if we had to make a deal that people didn't like, our role was to be ministers of justice. It was to convict the guilty, but also protecting the innocent. And I don't think we protected the innocent very well yesterday, and I certainly don't think that we're doing it today. There was a lot of chest beating that went on yesterday on the other side. And it was pretty effective, I guess, if the goal was to distract the American public for what they had heard in the morning, to distract and deflect from the moving, powerful testimony we heard. And I don't want to hear about respecting Dr. Ford when we are not giving her the respect of having an investigation of the case that she made to us yesterday. It was a while ago that this happened, and there's other claims out there as well. But it's been my experience, as Senator Whitehouse just articulated, that if you don't go back and look at things and you don't look at corroborating evidence and you don't talk to the witnesses, you're never going to know what happened. I have proposed and talked to some of my colleagues, and I know others have as well, as a finite period for an FBI investigation, maybe a week. George H.W. Bush ordered that in the Anita Hill case, a 3-day investigation. That happened. Whether people like that outcome or not, it happened. That is not even happening here. We are not even giving Dr. Ford the respect of having that investigation. And that is wrong. That is not being ministers of justice. This was a woman with no political background who made an attempt to call the front office of her Congresswoman. That's what she did. She did this before the nominee was even picked. She did it when the nominee was on a short list because she was concerned. That's what she did. So don't argue that she is part of some massive political strategy. Those aren't the facts. And yes, it's messy. The justice system is messy. Things come in at the last minute. It happens all the time. It happens before a trial. It happens before a hearing. And the question is not if it's messy. Senator Flake himself said yesterday, this is not a good process, but it's all we've got. The question is, what do you do when it happens, when you're in a position of power? What do you do when it happens? You may not like how this came in at the last minute. I would have liked to known about it earlier too, but I didn't. The question is, what do you do when it happens? And when it happens, you don't just put it under the rug. For so many years, this is what happened to claims like this. They were just swept under the rug. What happened in the House, no matter how bad it was, didn't belong in the courthouse. And that hurt women and that hurt children for a long, long time. But the times are changing now. We have someone who made a credible claim. The chairman even thanked her for her bravery. Well, where is the bravery in this room? This rush, when in fact we could have a finite period of time to interview a finite period of witnesses, someone who she alleges was in the very room where it happened. We are not able to even cross-examine them, ask them questions. We're not allowing the FBI to go in there and tell him to his face that you're going to get in criminal trouble if you don't answer these questions correctly. Instead, we get a letter behind the veil of a law firm. That's not the same thing. We have a polygraph expert Yesterday, I put that polygraph exam on the record. People were bristling over there and said, well, we want to see the charts. Well, we would be happy to have the polygraph expert testify and explain how this was verified. And yes, as Judge Kavanaugh pointed out, this is not a test that is admissible in court. But guess what? We use it for job interviews. We use it for the FBI. We use it for the Defense Department. We use it for the CIA. And the nominee himself has even said that this is useful to use for those purposes in a case that he decided in 2016. Those are the kind of witnesses we could hear from if we had the opportunity, maybe 1 week, to do it. So I look at it this way. If we want to show Dr. Ford respect, we give her the respect of having her case heard and the evidence looked at. I look at it as, what are you hiding? What would it hurt? If Judge Kavanaugh is so sure that he has this corroborating evidence and what this calendar means and what these things mean, then what is he afraid of if we just spend 1 week looking at the evidence? What I have heard today just adds to this. When I heard this sanctimonious talk about some kind of a political strategy, well, I'll give you Exhibit A, Merrick Garland, who was delayed for nearly 10 months. You talk about a nominee getting off the floor when all we're asking for is 1 week for an investigation, and you kept Merrick Garland away from this committee for 10 months? That's not even a comparison. That was a strategy yesterday. And boy, was it a strategy. And I sure hope that some of the senators who have not yet made a decision, who are not on this committee, will look at the evidence and look at what happened and see it for the strategy that it was. I asked Dr. Ford yesterday about what she remembers from that night. And I also asked her what she couldn't forget. And here's what she said. The stairwell, the living room, the bedroom, the bed on the right side of the room, the bathroom in close proximity, the laughter, the uproarious laughter, the multiple attempts to escape, and the final ability to do so. We heard her talk about how she had a civic duty to bring this up. We heard her testify about how she had actually brought this up 6 years before to a counselor, about how her husband recalls her using the judge's name. In the rules of evidence, it says that statements made to a professional, to a medical professional, are considered to be credible. In cases, when you compare evidence, you look at what their goals are. What would be their reasons to lie? And I look at, you have on one hand a judge who is a career-making moment to get on the United States Supreme Court. And by the way, no one is entitled to be on the United States Supreme Court. And then you have a woman who tried to keep this confidential, who came forward, sent a letter, tried to do what she could to keep her name out of the news, and finally, when the reporters showed up at her door, she came forward. I just see these as different. And when you look at the rules of evidence, when you look at credibility, the fact that she had mentioned this years before means a lot. But you could have doubters. I understand that. But when we don't have an investigation and we don't have things in writing to be able to look at the facts, where are we? I have been on this committee for a number of years, and I have been briefed on FBI background checks. And a number of times, and my colleagues know this, nominees withdraw because of what is in those background checks. They pull their names out. The press never knows it, but it happens. Or sometimes we're presented with some information that's not public, and we have to make a decision. Well, does this drug use amount to something that should keep this person off the bench? Does looking at this website amount to keeping this person off the bench? These are things we've actually considered. That's the kind of information we get from those background checks. And I think it's a good thing, because not everyone needs to be dragged through the mud. Things are contained in a background check.
Here we have order.
Those background checks are useful for us, and they're useful for the American people. I, for one, don't want to live in an evidence-free zone. We need this information. I would submit to my friends across the aisle that this is not a he said, she said. This is a he said, they said. There are a number of people out there who have talked about the fact, including the nominee's roommate, that he is belligerent when he gets drunk. Yes, that was a long time ago. Maybe he doesn't do that anymore. And I know people in high school drink a lot and in college, but when I asked him about this to try to get to the facts, I'm not an FBI agent, but all I was trying to do was try to figure out, well, maybe he has partially memory loss when he gets that drunk, or maybe he blacks out. I don't know. I was trying to get that. What did I get in response? A question of if I black out. Did he apologize? He did, and I appreciated that. But the point is, if we could have the FBI, like we do with all background checks, interview these witnesses, we could get to the bottom of the facts. Judge Kavanaugh said on Fox News and yesterday that he wants a fair process. That's what he said he wants. And when I asked the judge why he wouldn't ask the president to have the FBI reopen the investigation yesterday, he didn't make that request. He didn't really answer that question. There are only a few people in America right now that can reopen that investigation. The one sitting across the room, because yes, Senator Grassley could have held off this vote until we had that investigation. Judge Kavanaugh could have easily said, Mr. President, for this to move forward, I want to at least clear my name, but mostly I want to have the American people know whether or not this is true or not. He could have done that. Why didn't he do it? Because they're afraid of what they'll find out. Yesterday, the American Bar Association, as Senator Durbin has just noted and read the letter, sent a letter urging the committee not to vote on Judge Kavanaugh's nomination until the FBI has conducted appropriate follow-up. The ABA said that it made that request because of its, quote, respect for the rule of law and due process under law. I'm just waiting until the staff is done talking over there. The ABA said that it made the request because of its respect for the rule of law and due process under the law. I chose to get on this committee. I didn't get on it right away because I'd done this work for 8 years before I got on here. I got on here 2 years after I got to the Senate because I decided I wanted to continue that work, to uphold the respect for the rule of law and due process under the law. But that's not what I saw yesterday. So if this committee isn't going to respect the law, and if we go to the floor and the same thing happens again, I would remind my colleagues that the Constitution does not say we, the ruling party. The Constitution says we, the people. And if the people of this country want to have a check and balance in the Supreme Court, a check and balance on this administration, if they want to have a fair process, they're the only ones left to pitch in here. They're the only ones left to have a say. Because right now, the way this process is run, we're not running it like we, the people. It's being run like we, the ruling party. I vote no.
Senator Cruz, we hear about fair and open and thorough and everything that I just heard. We heard the inference of a political strategy on this side of the aisle not to be fair and thorough. I have seared in the back of my mind something that was said soon after July the 9th that Senator Schumer said that tells me about a political strategy that is carried on here the way it has to delay and delay and delay and delay, because he said, I'm going to fight Judge Kavanaugh nomination with everything I've got. And it seems like that has happened over the last 90 days. Senator.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're living in a divided time. This country is divided right down the middle. There is an enormous amount of anger. There's rage. There's hatred. We see demonstrators screaming at each other, reflecting that rage, reflecting that anger. And I know there are a great many Americans who wish we could and believe we can get back to an environment where we treat each other with civility and decency. Get back to an environment where, yes, we have policy disagreements. We disagree on what the right legislation is to pass. And we even have vigorous debates about what the right policy is. But we do so in a context that respects each other, that doesn't demean the humanity of each other, that doesn't attack the character and drag people through the mud. The politics of personal destruction that we have seen on display in recent days is Washington, D.C. at its very ugliest. And all of us should remember that we're talking about real human beings here. These aren't pawns on a chessboard. These are real people. Dr. Ford has been through hell. The last 2 weeks, I have no doubt, have been